Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am your host, Menas. We're recording this on Wednesday, the 16th of October, and I'm joined by Daniel Beswick from the Emerging Cricket Podcast and the ICC. Daniel, welcome back. How are you?
Good, fellas. Glad to be back on. Plenty of cricket to talk about. We're in full swing here.
And of course, joining us from Melbourne, we do allow a Victorian on the show, Damien Watson, broadcaster from SEN. Good evening.
Good evening, fellas. I have the token Victorian, I guess, and it's finally reaching above 20 degrees here this week. So that's a milestone.
Huge.
Yeah, huge.
Yep. We need someone in the podcast to remember that Marcus Harris is still alive and scoring runs. So that's what you're for. But listeners, there is so much news to get through. We have actually answers. So for the last month, the three of us have sat here speculating about what they were thinking, which way they might go. Well, George Bailey made some announcements this week, so we're going to get into that. There's also a lot of domestic news in Australia, a few interesting rule changes to the WBBL, some Sheffield Shield news, and of course, the Women's World Cup is going on, which is full of upsets. Two of the favourites are coming home. So anyway, Daniel Beswick's got some mea culpa stuff to go through a bit later on. So we'll get there. But let's start with the cricket headlines brought to you by Piccolo Podcast. The very first headline is, it has been confirmed Cameron Green is going to undergo surgery on his back in New Zealand and therefore will be out of the game for around 6 months. I tend to think 6 months means sort of 6 to 12 months because usually there's a pretty, it's around a 6-month recovery from surgery like that. Once you get back to playing, building up again. So huge news. Not a lot to really say about him undergoing the surgery, but I guess it's been done by other players before, notably James Pattinson did it. I think Ben Dwarshuis was another who's had the same surgery, but I wasn't really surprised. I mean, Damien, any thoughts around him going for the surgery?
Well, look, at the end of the day, if it's going to help prolong his career, I can understand why they go down this path. You spoke about James Pattinson before. I think a lot of the injuries that he sustained derailed the momentum of his career. You never know what could have happened going forward if he had a consistent run. And obviously, fast bowling takes a toll on your body. But if he had a consistent run at it, who knows what would have happened given what he showed in the early part of last decade. But yeah, I think given he's an all-rounder, you've got to take the precautions if necessary. You've got to take the medical advice on board as well. And I think it's a worthwhile option rather than him just going around as a specialist batsman. What it does do, I think, is it forces the hands of the selectors and the authorities involved to, I guess, have a backup plan, right? So some form of risk mitigation. So I think it's good to test the depth of the Australian teams if you want to take a silver lining out of it. And yeah, it is what it is, unfortunately. And it probably does make you rethink perhaps, and maybe those managing him, I'm not questioning anything, but does it help? Maybe, Daniel, I'll throw this to you. Do they rethink the way they manage his load in any way?
It has been a topic of conversation we've had here, and it looks as if Cameron Green has the makings of being a 3-format superstar for Australia.
When you say here, do you mean like in your living room or
no? Here is this virtual
realm
space,
of this podcast,
the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. We've posterized and hypothesized on this for a number of shows, but he's going to play all 3 formats for Australia down the line, and if we have to sacrifice 6 months for the sake of a dozen years of international cricket, I think now, okay, the Border Gavaskar Trophy is not a great time for this to happen, but in the grand scheme of, say, the next 6 months, there's no global tournament on the horizon outside of the Champions Trophy, which isn't exactly high on anyone's priority list. The World Test Championship final, that is probably one where we will miss him. He might actually be back for that, depending on the prognosis and the timeline. I think you might be right, man. I think it might be a little bit more than 6 months. But I think this is the right decision to be made at this point in time. It will bring up questions as to his workload. But again, if Cricket Australia is serious about him, in terms of central contracts, they're throwing as much money as they can physically, so he doesn't have to go on and play T20 franchise cricket anywhere else to help with that longevity. And yeah, who knows? After this, hopefully he comes back better and stronger, and we're better off for it than to let it, be kicked down the line and down the road further, and him ultimately getting in more trouble physically.
Almost rebuilding the foundations, and then hopefully he's able to maybe endure more. Anyway, big blow. So announced this week was the Australia squad to play Pakistan in an upcoming one-day international series, and also the Australia A side to play India A in the lead up to the first test. So George Bailey did a press conference. I don't think he was asked one question about the one-day squad. It was all about the test lineup, and he started off with a bit of a doozy. He basically he admitted that Steve Smith has asked to go back to number 4. And when pressed on it, he kind of admitted Steve Smith pushed to move up to opener, and now Steve Smith is, asked to move back to 4. So that's a huge question mark done. So we can all stop speculating. The selectors will now pick an opener, a basser, to bat in the top 6. Bailey said pretty much unequivocally that they're looking for a batter to fill that spot, and there's a real chance now that they might have to rotate the fast bowlers over summer. So I speculated that perhaps they'd want another all-rounder to fill the Cameron Green role, but I don't think that's a priority. I think they will stick an opening batter up the top. So, Damien, who do you think are the front runners to fill that spot?
Up the top of the order, it's an interesting one. I know we've spoken about Madison before, but I'm not as sold perhaps anymore. I still think you can probably wait and see what happens over the next few Shield games. I know that's the easy answer, but it's probably one where I would measure it on consistency. I don't think you could make
the Australia
that
A. I think the Australia A game would be run. If you score runs against India A.
Yeah, that's right. And played in the conditions as well. I think it'll be interesting, but I think it comes down to who makes a decent amount of scores going forward over a longer period of time.
Well, I think the 3 front runners are probably Bancroft, Harris, and Constas, who's jumped the queue. It seems like Renshaw and Madison, and he mentioned one other player. I can't remember who it was. Have just dropped back a bit in the pecking order.
Yeah.
So I guess, Daniel, well, what do you think they'll go for? Would it be Bancroft, Harris, or Constance? Or do you think, like Damien, that this run's going to come right down to the straight, and it's who can, smash down the door with a couple of hundreds now?
I'm eyeballing it right now, and I think, to be honest, right now my money would be on Bancroft, only because I know it was a pair in the Shield, wasn't it, that he ended up having, or something similar. But I think that's one of those ones where you're out so early, you can't tell if you're in touch or not, if you get a couple of good ones early. I think you're right. I think the Australia A squad will have a big bearing, and the way that game is played will have a big bearing on who gets the spot. I think the chat around Harris from other places and other sources tells me that I think Bancroft's probably a little bit higher in their estimations, and I think it's just a little bit too early for someone like Sam Constas, which makes me think by process of elimination that Bancroft will probably, at least at this point, unless someone really sticks out in that Australia A game, I think it's probably Bancroft's spot at this point. I'm a little bit disappointed that the likes of Madison and Renshaw aren't in the conversation personally, but I don't know if it's my blue bag bias there with Madison, and of course, I think I'm just a big fan of Matt Renshaw in general. So that's a little bit disappointing, but I can understand the rationale and the logic behind the decisions.
Sometimes it does come down to timing. Daniel, I reckon if it was 12 months ago, you can make the argument that Renshaw would have been further in the conversation, in my view. He had a very good start to the Sheffield Shield season last year, and things might have been different if we roll back 12 months ago. And, you make some salient points. I think Harris still might have an opportunity, particularly, you got to remember Victoria might be coming up against a pretty good New South Wales attack. If he, on the MCG, makes a very big score against a pretty good attack, that might put him further in the conversation as well.
Agreed. Yeah, I still think Constance is a big chance of overtaking Harrison Bancroft if he can score runs in the Shield against Victoria and against India A. So I think the decision's wide open. But if they were to pick back Bancroft, to a less extent Harris, I would be very displeased. I'm just hate the look of a top 4 with Kawaja, Bancroft, Labuschagne, and Smith. It's just too one note. You need it. It's 2024. You need a counter-attacking batter.
I would refute that only because that part is somewhat true. I think a right-left combination might be something that just keeps the India attack on their toes at the top of the order. But I mean, there's every chance if you lose.
If they're both leaving
early,
the ball, it's not really going to. They're both going to leave the ball incessantly. So it's not going to matter.
Yeah, I'd refute that a little bit. I understand the logic. I don't think it'll be that bad, but I think a right-left combination. I would put it this way: I'd rather Bancroft than Harris, just by virtue of the right-left combination instead of two lefts.
Yeah. I like the certainty though that George Bailey has pretty much laid it down that it's a top order spot they're looking for, and I guess there's still the added option of them fashioning someone to open the batting either from the current Australian top 6 or picking someone from outside and saying, you want to have a crack at opening. It's been done many times. I guess just looking at the Australia A squad that was announced, there's a few points of interest there. Nathan McSweeney is the captain, and we've seen him do very well for South Australia and also for Brisbane Heat, captaining them to the Big Bash title last summer. I think Nathan McSweeney is a definite future Australian Test player. He's also maybe a future Australian Test captain. I think that's a long way off. He's got to bat first at Test level, but been lucky enough to commentate on a few of his innings at domestic level. And he's one of the most organised and technically correct batters in the current first-class setup. So glad to see him get the captaincy. Also, Cooper Connolly's in that squad. Ollie Davies, after a breakout summer last year with 3 centuries. Sam Constas, we spoke about. They're the sort of names that jump out to me. Josh Phillippe's in that squad. And also Corey Rocacholi, which I think is, very good reward for some outstanding form at Sheffield Shield level. And I know Nathan Lyon rates Rocacholi very highly. And I don't think it's a lay-down misère that Todd Murphy, if there's an off spinner replacing Nathan Lyon, it's him. I think Rocacholi is pretty close to him in that race. So to Murphy in that race. So any thoughts on the Australia A squad? Damien, you want to take that first?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to touch on, and I know you mentioned George Bailey gave some somewhat concrete answers. I think it would have been worth maybe at least considering, and I'm sure they probably did, considering somewhat of a like-for-like replacement when you have a look at the Cam Green, when you have a look at that Australia A squad where you've got Michael Neser and even Bo Webster, who,
True.
That would have been good stories potentially if they would have been in the conversation. You might disagree with that, but they've both been in pretty good form of late, and we know about the versatility, particularly of Bo Webster, given, he can be a medium pacer as well as a spinner. So I just thought that might have come under a bit more consideration, but that's just me.
I don't think so. I will say with Bailey, he did defer to the coaching staff and Pat Cummins on the batting order stuff. So what I'm saying is he didn't rule out bringing in, say, a Webster or a Neser and Marnus going up to open, but he was way more on the front foot about an opener. But he did sort of say, it could change. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, and probably just 2 other brief ones. I think Australia A are playing at the MCG. Scott Boland in that Australia A squad. Whenever he bowls at the MCG is always very exciting to watch. He loves it there. And Jordan Buckingham, one to have a look at as well. Had a pretty reasonable last summer for South Australia. He was clutch in a couple of very key type moments as well. You think of that game.
Famous win at the
Queensland at the Gabba, yeah. So he's one to look out for. Got plenty of scope for improvement as well.
Daniel, do you have anything on the Australia A squad?
Just great to see Josh Philippe involved. As I would like to think I'm the leader of the Josh Philippe fan club. I might be. There's probably a lot of people in the Josh Philippe fan club, but I've been on him very early for a long time, and it's just great to see him. It's been awesome to see him in white for New South Wales as well recently too, which is good to see. I'm a huge fan of McSweeney, as both of you guys have echo the sentiments of the pair of you, and it's good to have, I think, Scott Boland there against this India A squad because, as you said, if there's going to be a rotation, as Cummins and Bailey as Bailey hinted, if there's going to be rotation, Scott Boland will have to play a pretty big role in this Border Gavaskar Trophy. So for him to get a little bit of intel on potentially some of his opponents that he'll be coming up against come the Border Gavaskar Trophy, or at least players of similar style and ilk, then I think you should get a lot out of that as well. I think, you guys basically nailed just about everything else in all of that.
I'm curious how Pat Cummins feels about what George Bailey said about rotating the fast bowlers, because unlikely that Cummins will want to miss a test match considering he's skipper. So then you're talking about rotating Stark and Hazelwood. And I just, my gut feeling is Cummins wants another bowler in that team. But I still think you can definitely get away with, Head, Labuschagne, Mitch Marsh bowling you 10, 15 overs a day. But they're not going to be the same quality of Cameron Green.
Do you include Boland at the MCG in particular?
Well, it makes sense as well, because that you get to the back end of the series. So that's when the three fast bowlers, one of them might need a break.
Yeah.
But I just don't think Cummins is, I'd like to get Cummins' feelings on this.
Yeah. You look at the schedule. Assuming that every test goes 5 days, which I'm sure they won't, but the first test finishes on the 26th of November, and then there's a 10-day break. So you've got a little bit of time there, but then from 2 to 3, there's only 4 days. And then from fourth test to fifth test, there's only 4 days break as well. So it's definitely something to kind of map out and piece out. If Boland plays in Melbourne, for instance, does he plays in Melbourne, replacing Stark or Hazelwood, who would play Brisbane and Sydney, potentially, with Sydney being the deciding test match as well in all of it. I'm intrigued.
Good analysis. I'm curious how that's all going to play out. There was an interesting article by Dan Brettig that wrote, Smith's campaign to open and then not to open also demonstrated the lighter touch of decision makers around the team in the era of Pat Cummins and Andrew McDonald. This has been construed at times as a case of the selectors making themselves redundant as the players run the show. And then he writes, Smith's time at the top may appear wasted to some, but it has also bought time for others. I think there's definitely an element where the players run the show a little bit more in this current setup. They've said it. McDonald and co have said it. But I don't think this is Smith. I don't think Smith moving up the order is an example of that, because we're talking about, a player that averages, 60 at test level. And I think if he wants to have a go at opening, you back someone that good. But anyone else think maybe the players are just running the show a little bit too much? Like maybe it needed a firm someone at the top to say, no, Steve, you're a number 4. We're going to keep you there. Where did either of you lie on that?
I would say that I think I mentioned it on the show maybe a couple of weeks ago. I think in terms of opening the batting, it's a mindset of wanting to do it, which I think helps you get a long way in the caper of seeing off a new ball and then pressing on in your innings. And I think it was good that Smith put his hand up and said, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to play my part in a different way for the team. And I think it's a mental thing as much as anything else. And Smith, okay, maybe with Khawaja might not have been the best combination, per Menna's point earlier in the show about having two, let's say, more defensive players opening the batting. But I would go back and say that I kind of like the initiative of Steve Smith saying, look, I want to take on the extra responsibility. I want this to be my role. I want to kind of cement myself even further as one of the greats and helping the team do that through opening the batting. I don't necessarily think that, what he said went in that regard, but I think it probably went a long way in regards to how the team was constructed after that, because you've got a guy already in the team who helps you solve one problem. Okay, exactly. It might ask questions of another problem that you have, but at least I suppose the opening batter question was a more prevalent and more pressing question at the time than.
And they wanted to get Green, and they wanted to get Green back in as well. So, I don't think this is a decision of where the running of the show has got out of control. And you know me, I'll smash them if they do.
I think it is probably symptomatic of the players having more control. I think the whole Justin Langer situation proved that, didn't it? I think it's important to have impartial decision makers outside of the playing group, though, someone to cast a bit of an objective eye. And look, there's no full objectivity to anything because even selectors are going to have their biases, aren't they? Particularly if they're former players, because they gravitate to the way in which they believe certain players play and whether they remind them of them, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's important to have an outside lens to it. You go back to 25 years ago. I remember Shane Warne was the vice captain. He got dropped by his own captain, Steve Waugh, and that caused frictions and a lot of, it did cause a bit of unrest between the two of them. I don't think they ever really forgave each other after that. But they were still able to carry on professionally. The point I'm trying to make is, sometimes when players get too much involved, I think you lose that objectivity a little bit.
Yeah, you back your mates, and you don't want to make the tough
mates
decision.
Look after mates. At the end of the day, when you want to win, you reward merit, unless someone's an absolute pain in the ass, manners, and you just can't be around them.
Yeah, exactly. All right, see you, Damien. No, just joking. All right, we're going to take our first break on Cricket Unfiltered, and then we'll be back to keep going with this discussion on the state of the Australian team. You are listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Menners. I'm joined with Daniel. And we were just talking about the makeup of the Australian side and whether they run the show. A couple more issues that came out from that press conference. I think I just want to make it clear. Bailey Constance is in the mix. Like, I don't think Harris and Bancroft are that far ahead that they, and we'll get to the age of the side in a minute, but this team getting, so old with, no players under 30 now. I think Green was the only player under 30. There has to be some kind of look at, okay, well, this is a good time to bring Constance in because he's got Khawaja with him, he's got Marnus behind him, and he's got Smith behind him. So not only is that a little bit of a good entry into the side, it's also a huge ability to learn and probably upskill very quickly. Sam and I did go to the same school, actually. So that would be good to see a fellow went to the same school in the Aussie Test team. Like to see that.
Slightly impartial there, Menners.
Well, yeah, I just thought I'd put that out there.
At least you've disclosed your conflict of interest. That's the main thing.
Yeah, I can't quite sit here and paint
lovely
pictures
kid.
about Alan Davidson, who's the only player of note from my alma mater. So yeah, I'm happy to say that I'm impartial in all of this.
Mate, actually, the biggest celebrity from my school was Natalie Gauci, who won season 5 of Australian Idol, and don't think she had a song after that.
Wow. All right, so Qantas is in the mix. I did ask George Bailey if age was a factor in selection, and he said no. Basically, he said that age is not a factor in selection, and they'll be just picking the best player for that spot. But he did say that you're always looking at the big picture. So I think, and judging from his performance so far, I do not think they're going to force a turnover in this side. They will wait for the players to start to drop off. They're not going to be like, look, pick a name, say Khawaja. You might have another 8 tests in you, but we're going to move you on because we can't have you and Smith and whoever else going all at the same time. But yeah, he didn't say age was a factor, which I guess means that, Harris or Bancroft, it's still just as in the mix as a Constance.
Different in the women's side, though, Menners. So I think age is a factor there sometimes when I look at their selection. But it's justified given the way they're going. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But yeah, I think when it comes to the crunch, it's not an overriding factor, but it's got to be a little bit of a factor, isn't it? Age.
Well, because I think you've got to take the opportunity. So it is, you sort of look at this top 6 about, say, who you'd drop if you wanted to. You can't really drop Khawaja yet, but you can at the end of this summer. If he has a bad summer and finishes this test year averaging 30, you can say, okay, we're not going to carry you anymore. Mitch Marsh, maybe not just yet, but there's no real, you're not going to drop Marnus or Smith or Head. So this opportunity's come up with Green having to take the summer off. I think it's You got to look to win. But if you're weighing up two players and there's not much between them, you just have to go for the younger player for the sake of the team. Because, in 2 years, when we lose all these players, we could go back to the 1980s where Australia doesn't win a test series for 4 years.
Oh, I don't think it'll ever get that bad, but I see your point. I think the timing's an interesting one. If this wasn't India touring, if it was, let's say Pakistan or the West Indies like we've had in previous summers, I think the inclination would have been heading towards someone like Sam Constas and blooding him through. I know all these matches have World Test Championship points on the line and all of that jazz, but I think given the scale of this particular series, I think you're probably wanting just to make sure that whoever is put into the fire aboard a Gavaskar Trophy cricket is somewhat adept in doing it at some level. And I mean, Bancroft's seen more heat than a lot of people for reasons not just with the bat, with other things going on as well. I don't know how much that factors in, but that would be my only take on holding back someone like Constas anyway.
And Constas, I know that there's been a lot of talk about him at underage level for a long period, but we're really basing this off, he's in the right form at the right time. Where does experience come into it here? I just think there's a greater body of work with the other two. I see your point, and I see the fact, I agree with you in the sense that Constas' style is more conducive to having that point of difference. But at the same time, is it a situation where he's flavour of the month?
We'll find out. All right, so that is sort of all the main news from those teams that were announced. I guess I didn't say anything about the squad to play Pakistan in the one-day internationals, but of note, all the big fish are playing, except Mitch Marsh and Travis Head, who are both on paternity leave. But this is the last series before the Champions Trophy next year. The last 50-over series before the Champions Trophy next year. So it's a good opportunity. So you've got Hazelwood, Stark, Cummins all playing. I think of interest, Jake Fraser-McGurk's in there. Cooper Connolly's in there ahead of Ashton Agar again. So I think that, draws a line in Ashton Agar's international career for the moment. But yeah, it's pretty much a star-studded team to play Pakistan in that one-day series. All right. So let's move on to the Sheffield Shield. When we recorded last week, I think they'd played 2 days. Well, there were 3 draws across the board. But the headlines were Sam Constas made a century in the second innings. That's why we're talking about him so much. So he's the youngest player since Ricky Ponting to make twin hundreds in a Sheffield Shield match. So that's why he's got set tongues wagging. Alice Carey made a century in the second innings to back up his 90 in the first innings. I think that's a really great innings. Shows he's in really good form heading into the Test summer, and with Josh Inglis nipping at his heels. He scored 200 runs in that game. So, he's pretty much palmed off Inglis there, I think. That was the sort of things that jumped out to me from that Shield round. Damien, I know you love your Shield cricket. Surely something jumped out at you.
Yeah, it's just a bit disappointed. The Junction Oval match turned into a run fest again. There was a bit of life in it early doors, and it was a good test for Marcus Harris, and I think he could take a lot of solace out of what he produced early in that match against Tasmania. But I don't know if it's the greatest thing, greatest result even for these 3 matches to end up in Batterfont-type draws. One was a bit more comprehensive in regards to the other 2 when you make the comparison.
Well, New South Wales had South Australia. They had New South Australia 5 for...
That's right. That was probably the one point of difference. But the Victoria v Tasmania game was a real Batterfont. So that was a little bit disappointing. But I can see that they tried, the curators, to give a bit of life into the pitch. But, yeah, it wasn't to be. So that was the one disappointing thing I took out of it, I guess.
Well, I mean, Cricket Central's dying. I mean, you talk about the Junction Oval. Cricket Central, I don't think they've been able to get a first-class result there since New South Wales started playing there, unless New South Wales have been beaten, which is highly likely. But they certainly haven't been able to bowl the team out on the last day. And the pitch kind of dies. It sort of just becomes lifeless. And I think there is that. You've got to have it one way or the other. It's either got to break up at the end so the spinners come into the game, or it's got to start with a bit of seam. But it can't be just this starts at a good batting pitch and then dies. That's just bad for cricket. It's got to do something. And I think Cricket Central. They should just try and turn it into a raging Turner by the looks of it.
Simulate India conditions every time we travel to the subcontinent.
We'll just start. You just start it like you would on day 4 or 5. They used to do that at the SCG. Go back to the 80s and 90s, and they would just start on it. Mo Matthews would be bowling in the first half an hour. Anything for you, DB, from the Shield rounds?
No, I really can't say. No, I really can't say there isn't that hasn't been mentioned already. I'd say the one thing that probably stood out is someone that we've mentioned already, in Nathan McSweeney making that 100 for South Australia and ensuring that they saw that game out. I think that shows quite a level of maturity. I know that the New South Wales attack's probably not the strongest one we've ever had, but players like Nathan Lyon are there. He opened the bowling there, which probably emphasises your point regarding Cricket Central. Tanveer Sanger as well. Yeah, it was a nice little battle there with Travis Head at times. Not a great matchup for a leg spinner against the left-hander, but good to see him, I guess, bowling against, probably the most informed Australian player at the moment. They're probably the two sort of talking points for me anyway.
Mitch Marsh made some runs as well.
Yeah,
I've been saying he's struggling for form, but he made 90 for Western Australia. So got to even the score up with old Smash, because I do like him. Marsh, not Smash. He's retired. All right, some Damien, I've got some big news for you. You must have lit up when this came into the inbox. All 6 Sheffield Shield teams will have the opportunity to play day-night first-class cricket this summer, following confirmation today that 3 fixtures, that's not today, it was a few days ago, will become pink ball matches. So there's 2 in November and then 1 in March. But they've said that's a way to give domestic cricketers some pink ball cricket, so they can, if they make the step up to test level, they've got some experience. I love this. I was sad it went away. I think it was a lot of fun having some pink ball Shield cricket, and I'm glad to see it back. And it does mean that it's on in prime time, which may help the interest of the tournament a little bit. Damien, excited? Think it's a good move?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right in regards to helping the interest in the Sheffield Shield, in the sense that people, outside of the Perth matches, people do have the opportunity to watch it after work. Because at the end of the day, betters, unless you're on a job site and you have the noise flickering in the background, not many people are going to have the time to watch it live, are they? So
no.
I think it's a good move in terms of gauging interest. Also, probably worth mentioning, and this, I guess, forebodes my can't let it go, but Queensland play Victoria at the Gabba in a day-night pink ball match. We saw Australia play Sri Lanka in a pink ball.
Oh, did I steal your can't let it go?
2019. No, well, mine's in relation to the Ashes fixture.
Okay. Well, we'll save it. Yep.
Yeah. So, but obviously the Gabba, just as a foreboding, obviously the Gabba will be the day-night venue for the Ashes, and the following summer after this. And it'll be good to see how it's received at the Gabba, particularly with those colourful seats that they have over there, which they've had for years.
Daniel, should be fun. Anything you want to add to the... I guess one thing I want to add is with the pink ball experiment is one of the reasons they took it away was there was a feeling over a few years that it was becoming too difficult for batters in Australia to really develop, because they were playing at the beginning and the end of the season. They were playing pink ball games. They had the Dukes ball in there. And they felt that for a while there, it was just too much of a bit of a mishmash for the batters, and it was hard for any of them to sort of really hone their craft. So I think this is the right move, though, to bring around back. I think they should do it every year because I think it's important. Daniel?
I don't mind it. I think it'll be a good opportunity for the players at this level to get a taste of it as well. As we've mentioned, it's sort of been exclusive to Test cricket and players at the next level. And you never know, in a train, hard play, easy kind of way, it might help develop the batters a little bit, just become adept in different conditions and with some different variables in front of them. So, I don't really have a lot else to add apart from I'm looking forward to it from a prime time standpoint, as you guys mentioned as well.
Excellent. All right. Now let's get to the Women's World Cup, because we have had a series of upsets. So the semi-finals have been decided. Australia will play South Africa on Thursday night, and then New Zealand will play the West Indies on Friday night. So that means everybody going into this tournament was saying the two teams that could challenge Australia were England and India. Daniel, especially after backing Mongolia a few weeks ago and then they got bowled out for 10, has backed England to maybe win this World Cup. And then they've dropped like 8 catches against the West Indies to see them crash out of the tournament. Daniel, how's our very own Oracle going?
Not very well, evidently. As I even went on SEN to talk to Damo about this, and I said I think I was this close. I think I said something along the lines of I'm this close to saying that England could pip Australia in the final, but my smart money is on Australia. So at least that part I sort of hedged a little bit. But
I'm going to find that audio. I'm going to find that audio.
I cannot say that I saw this coming at all in, well, both groups really, with India being disappointing and that poor performance against New Zealand and New Zealand going through, who I think are probably still a couple of years away from being good with the newer generation that will have to come through with the likes of Devine and Bates ultimately giving it up at some point. But yeah, for England, just immensely disappointed. They were woeful in the field. I know fielding at this tournament hasn't been great. The Ring of Fire in Dubai makes it really hard. The night conditions maybe.
What does the Ring of Fire mean?
It's the Ring of Fire is the lights that basically go around the Dubai International Stadium. Instead of having your set of, say, 4 floodlights around, they've just got one band of lights all the way around. Right. And as soon as it goes in that, apparently it's very difficult for a fielder to sort of gauge and field under lights.
And I guess a lot of the players aren't used to playing in these big stadiums under lights, apart from Australia and England and maybe India, but a lot of the Western nations would not play at night.
Yeah, I think it probably hurt Scotland a little bit. But yeah, I don't think England really had that many excuses. I thought they were quite poor at times with the bat, a team that doesn't quite have a batting order as long as Australia, because no one does, frankly. But they had the bowling that really suited these conditions. And yeah, ultimately they let the West Indies get away from them. A good time for Kiana Joseph to score her first ever international 50 in any format, doing it in basically a quasi knockout game at a T20 World Cup, which probably caught England by surprise. But yeah, it's a strange one. The Final Four now, to be honest, as a neutral, I don't really mind who wins from here. I think, it'd be a great story if one of the other 3 teams here win it. Of course, the story of Australia being one of the greatest teams in women's sport across all sports, I think is a story in itself. But yeah, as a neutral, I'm excited by the Final Four here.
I mean, it's great to see South Africa, New Zealand and the West Indies get through. I think it's interesting because the last time Australia lost a T20 World Cup final was to the West Indies. And I do think they're the sort of team that can get on a run. And they've got some really talented players. Not to the extent that Australia has, but enough that if they have a good day, I do think they're a team that could beat Australia. Not like, I think if Australia played West Indies in 5 matches, Australia would probably win 3 or 4 of them. But in a one-off final, they've got a couple of match winners that do play quite a bit of WBBL cricket, could push Australia. But hard to back anyone but the Aussies, Damien.
Yeah, you'd have to say so. Probably one other aspect just to add on to that, Matt, is Australia playing South Africa in the semi. Don't forget there was that semi-final in 2020 on home soil for Australia where they didn't have it all their own way against South Africa. The rain came at the right time for Australia. That was unbelievable, where it pelted down in Sydney for the entire day. And there's just enough of a window at night to complete the match, but it was really the composure of the likes of Meg Lanning that got them through that semi, because it was a situation where there were times where you thought they were in a precarious position, the Australians. So you never know if the Proteas either, if they could cause an upset. But yeah, money's on Australia at this point, and hopefully they get the attention that they deserve as well. I know it's hard because of the time zone and because it's in the UAE, and the fact that it's not necessarily, it's on a reasonable streaming service, but it's not on free to air. I think they deserve the credence that they should get for winning 4 T20 titles in a row. I mean, we gave the Matildas heaps, and rightly so, but this is something special across all sports.
Absolutely. I guess other news from the T20 World Cup, Elisa Healy has a foot injury, so she's in severe doubt for the semi-final. I think sort of draw a line through her playing the rest of this tournament, but they're going to hopefully get her in there, but it's not going to happen. So Talia McGrath has been captaining the team, and Taylor Vlamic had to come home, unfortunately, and she was replaced by Heather Graham. So that's a real blow for her. She's had a terrible run of injuries, and unfortunately, she's suffered another one. I guess, Daniel, you of the three of us, you've been working on the World Cup, so covered it most closely. Sort of big picture, do you think this tournament's gone well? What are some of the good things, the bad things?
I think in terms of parity amongst the teams, I think women's cricket is in a pretty good spot where, as we've talked about just now, I think two of the semi-finals and the two semi-final spots have been somewhat unexpected. And I think in previous tournaments, we probably sit here, if we're honest with ourselves, and say that tournaments have gone roughly the way that we sort of pictured them from the start. I think with Healy, let's just say Healy doesn't play the final should Australia get there. I don't think they'll have it all their way to win another tournament. And then looking at the rest of the group here, well, the two groups, I think Scotland probably underperformed a little bit to their abilities, which only just says that in 2 years' time, when they hopefully come back in a 12-team tournament, they give a better account of themselves. But there's actually a couple of good teams that didn't qualify for this tournament that should pose a bit more of a threat in 2 years' time. I look at the emergence of UAE's women, Ireland, who missed out on this particular tournament as well. I think the collective sort of quality amongst the players will make this an even better product than it already is. I think women's cricket at the moment is in reasonably good shape. It could be a little bit stronger from the very high end point of view, maybe with Australia being so dominant. But again, everyone is catching up. And I think the glory days of Australia, while they might not necessarily be ending, they will be the glories and the trophy lifts might be a little bit fewer and far between, with a number of these teams jumping in. And in the UAE, in a few matches, I think we've actually seen some, by UAE standards, a neutral venue, we've seen some pretty good crowds as well. So, look, I think from an Australian point of view, it's probably been tough given that this tournament's been in the middle of the night. I think we should be celebrating this team as much as we do celebrate the Matildas, ultimately because we win more. But in terms of the tournament as a whole and the women's game, I think we're in a pretty good spot, and I think it bodes well for future global events, for the next couple of cycles at least.
I'd agree. I think the disappointing thing is, I know there's a lot of circumstances moving the tournament at the last minute, but I just think you got to play in better conditions. You can't be playing in the UAE when it's this hot. And I know it was moved at the last minute. Bangladesh would have been pretty hot. I mean, they should be playing in optimal conditions. I do not think you'd probably schedule a men's tournament at the same time.
It's an interesting comparison because, I mean, we had the 2021 T20 World Cup moved to UAE last minute as well.
COVID was a different
I suppose you could probably pivot. They had a bit longer to pivot on that one too, because this one was 2 months before it was meant to be played out in Bangladesh, before they sort of made the decision. In UAE, quite frankly, was probably one of the only places that could have realistically and feasibly held a tournament at such short notice. Maybe if you schedule more night games in somehow, and you might have pushed the tournament out longer in terms of a timeline, but they were already pretty strict on the time that they had at their disposal as well, with everything going on in the Future Tours program as well. So I think they've done well with the cards that they've been dealt, in fairness.
Oh, yeah. I think these circumstances would have to take into account, but let's not repeat them. All right, we're going to take our final break on Cricket Unfiltered. Then we'll be back with a little bit about a discussion about where my two colleagues go for their cricket news. You're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Menas. I'm with Daniel and Damien, and I want to get your guys' reaction to this tweet from eminent cricket commentator Jim Maxwell, friend of the show, friend of mine, great guy. And actually, he went to the same school as me and Sam Constas and Ed Cowan. There you go. Anyway, Jim wrote, and this is on October the 13th, so last Sunday. It's the final demise of the Sun Herald this morning. After years of covering cricket, they've given up. Not one story about the summer game, Australia's national sport. Their only cricket writer, Dan Brettig, is Melbourne-based, and then anything in the Age. I don't think there was anything in the Age. So I guess, I thought about this tweet, and I actually think his statement is true that we've seen a shift in the last year or two from the newspapers in covering a lot less cricket. So, News Corp has Ben Horn and had Crash, but Crash does all the sports. Ben Horn mainly does cricket, and they've got Dan Cherney, who does a bit of everything. I think he does some AFL in the winter, but he does a lot of cricket too. And remember, News Corp own cricket because of Foxtel, so they are obliged to cover it. Whereas the Sun Herald, not obliged to cover it. They're going through massive redundancies at the moment, and they're just thinking, well, we're not going to carry too many cricket writers, and we'll carry some, but I sort of think it is a turning, and I felt for a long time, and it's why I started a podcast, that eventually, people aren't going to be going to newspapers for cricket news. They're going to be going to podcasts, social media, websites, but it's not going to be, what's written in the Sun Herald. So I'm, curious, as two gentlemen who are a little bit younger than myself might have an opinion on this. Damien, lead me off.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to maybe point out, you mentioned the News Corp rights situation. I think there's an element of politics here where other media outlets who are not part of News Corp, they're like, well, News Corp and Cricket Australia are associated with each other under the current rights deal, so therefore we're not going to, this happens all the time, we're not going to cover cricket to the same extent. That's what happens. And that was, I guess, the threat if Cricket Australia went down the Paramount path in the last rights deal.
So, I will say cricket has kind of been able to sort of navigate that because it's the only real summer sport. But go on.
Yeah, there's probably growing competition though in a way too, in the sense that the NBL is starting to increase its output. The A-League isn't going all that well, but things could change there. I think when it comes to my consumption, as someone who's Gen Y/Gen Z, I'm right on the pretty much the periphery. I don't think I really read too many. I think the match report, I don't know why they have, personally, I don't know why they have reporters, newspapers have reporters there at the ground writing match reports when highlights, days play, everything is so easily consumed. It's not like the days where, unless you were watching it live, that was it. You wouldn't have any way to really see what's happened. So I reckon.
So what gen? So what gen did you say? What gen did you say you were?
I'm technically Y, but I'm just a month before Z. So work that one out. But you know what I mean. I'm pretty much on.
No, just checking. I'm Gen X. Just scraping there.
But yeah, in terms of the way I consume it, I watch highlights because I like to see it visually. And like you, I probably listen to podcasts and read opinion pieces off the back of those highlights. I think people are able to objectively judge for themselves based on, I know highlights don't necessarily capture the entirety of a game, but I don't think we need as many cricket writers these days. I'm just thinking from a hardline business point of view. Do you really need these amount of accredited cricket writers? I don't think so.
Also, there's no friggin' reward for breaking a story now. If you break a story, literally within half an hour, it's everywhere, and no one knows who broke the story. So, yeah, actually, if you break a story, you have to go, oh, look at this story I broke. There's very few stories now that sort of news breaking. Like even if you get News Corp always get the team before everybody else. Just happens to happen, and they have the cricket rights and very well sourced journos, I would say, all of them. But within 15 minutes, that team's all over every social media. People are reacting to it, and it just doesn't matter who broke it. Like there's no value in breaking that story.
And there's even a market now for aggregators on Twitter to basically collect all the news that's been in cricket, and then to just tweet it and then just give the source in brackets. Like there's Johns in India who has an abhorrent number of followers for some of the most basic stuff, but he's good in that he just gets it and he just spurts it back out to a wider audience. And that's unfortunately where kind of media is at the moment. It's not necessarily who has something to say, it's who says it the loudest and who can say it in front of the most people. And someone like that proves ultimately very valuable for an organization. I think when it comes to media organizations and the paper, I mean, I'm trying to think the last time I read a paper in the physical form, and it's probably if I sat down at a cafe or I sat down at a doctor
Do you go to the
websites?
websites? Do you go to smh.com? Or
Yeah. I'd flick through them, but it's not. I wouldn't say that I religiously read anyone. I think I sort of, again, I'm sort of a result of what social media has become. Whereas, if you see a good story that is amplified bigger than others, they tend to take my eyeballs. It's just the way that it kind of goes. I don't like it, but at the same time, it's kind of where we're at in the industry.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, Menners, too, just for context. I think with the Women's T20 World Cup, my understanding is outside of the cricket.com.au journos that are there on the ground, like Laura Jolly, etc., I don't think there's any media company that sent, you might correct me, Daniel, if I'm wrong, but I don't think any other media company sent anyone there. And I think that's often the case. Do you really need to pay for hotel and accommodation for writers to go around? They do for the Ashes, but that's probably about it. Whereas in the past, they used to follow the Australian team, a lot of those writers like Crash, etc. So it's a financial thing. The media's not gaining as much of an income as it used to. That's just the reality. And with Jim Maxwell as well, I know because I follow him on Twitter. He makes mention of the lack of rugby union coverage as well. I think he said on the ABC News, such as they didn't cover the rugby union,
the shoot shield,
shoot shield or something. I've seen a few of those tweets as well. So just a sign of the times. But yeah, Jim picks up on it. I noticed.
Yeah, I think it's kind of different when there's when the Australian men's team is on tour. It's good having a reporter there. But as I said, they get gazumped so quickly now that
you just watch it on TV, Menners. Do you really need to?
Absolutely.
I'm just thinking from a hardcore business point of view.
Yeah,
do you really
absolutely.
need to pay someone to go out there?
No, but I know for me, being at the ground and wandering around, that's where you just get a ton of information. Where you can work sources, where you can talk to people. You lose that in a living room.
But as you said, how many exclusives now? I mean, cricket.com.au,
Exactly.
their own arsenal of journalists who put it out before anyone else most of the time. They just bring their own people.
No, so it's not for exclusives, and that's the thing. It's just for me. So, I like to know the game inside out and talk to as many people as I can. But yeah, I sort of, when I want cricket news, I sort of do go to the SMH and the News Corp just to see what they've got. But on the News Corp, there'll be days where they don't put a cricket story up, like literally days. And then around matches and stuff, it's well covered. I do listen to a lot of cricket podcasts to keep up with the news. I probably subscribe to like 20 cricket podcasts. I don't listen to all of them all the time, but and a lot of other very good cricket podcasts out there. I have made fun of some of them in the past, and I will call them out. But I think the cricket podcasting community, what cricket podcasting's done now is, like, if you're a real cricket tragic, you can just I don't have to sit through fucking AFL talk on some radio station. I can just no names, Damien. I can just listen to cricket chat all day and then sprinkle in other podcasts. So I do love that. And all right, let's get into Can't Let It Go. But yes, ad-free version plus subscribe on Patreon. And I'm doing my Mad Manners every week. And then we're going gangbusters. So once a week, they're on YouTube or on Twitter and on podcasts. And actually, doing really well on all those platforms. So thank you, everybody, for supporting. At the moment on my Mad Manners show, I'm going through the team and previewing the team by giving you my insights into each of the players in the Australian team. I only got 3 players in because I did a bit of a preamble before I started this one, and I'm trying to keep them short. But I did Khawaja, the people vying for the opening spot, and Marnus Labuschagne. So anyway, now let's get to Can't Let It Go. Who wants to start? Daniel?
I've got 2. I'll keep the first one short. ICC Hall of Fame. We've got 3 new inductees announced basically as we recorded tonight. AB de Villiers, Alistair Cook, and Neetu David. David, of course, a pioneer in the Indian women's game. Sir Alistair Cook, we don't need to mention from an Australian point of view what it was like coming up against him more often than not for England. And AB de Villiers, I think we could probably say, is the first true great 3-format batter in the modern game, and sort of revolutionized cricket and how it's played in many respects, both with the bat and in the field as well. So congratulations to those three. I've done a yarn on de Villiers in particular on ICC at some point. So have a read of that just to do some spruiking of my own manners. But other can't Absolutely. Let it go. Was a little bit more...
ICC, do it properly on icc.com.
ICC-cricket.com. There'll be a sort of it's like a half story, half biography of de Villiers there. I enjoyed doing it. And it's sort of, I don't know if it's a recency bias of sort of believing your own bullshit, but reading it back, I was like, you know what? I think we appreciated how good AB de Villiers was, but I think when we look back on history, I think we'll actually probably revere him a little bit greater than we did even at the time. I think only because I think he sort of revolutionized that spot, and probably him and, say, Virat, when Virat was going gangbusters there across all three formats, very few players have been able to sort of recreate that. And AB de Villiers can score 130 balls, or he can score 100 and 300 balls and save a test match. Not many players can say they can do that like AB. I'll leave that there. My other one, a little bit more pressing and maybe a bit more hot takey, or maybe a little bit more controversial. What in the world is going on in Pakistan? Like, okay, I know it's sort of a joke that, you know, when things go full Pakistan, it just kind of goes all sort of tits up. But I think there's a reason behind it sort of being what we describe as a Pakistan, being truthful in that I think they've had, I think I read this week, they've had 27 different selectors in the last 3 years for the men's team alone. And we've just seen Barber given the flick. They said he was officially rested. I don't really believe that. I think if he was rested, you would have given him a little bit more time and a little bit more grace. Shaheen, I believe, is somewhat rested. I think they've just bowled him into the ground, and I think the management there has been poor as well. I think you've got to sort of work. At best, it's just sort of blind sort of naivete and maybe looking to try and reinvent the wheel at its best. At its worst, there's just some plain corruption in sight in Pakistan cricket that we don't necessarily know about. But here they are trying time and time again to reinvent the wheel. And they haven't won anything since 1992. They're a side that on paper, with the ability and the abundance of ability and potential that they have as a country and as a cricket team, I think there's heaps of it. You only need to see Fatima Sana on the women's side and all the class she had at this particular T20 World Cup to tell you that it is possible in Pakistan for players to flourish and for her to come back in difficult circumstances. But on the men's side, like, what's going on? Sarfraz Ahmed, right, is in the squad, in the test squad as a player, while also on the selection committee and as a quote-unquote mentor of the Pakistan team. There's a reason why other teams win and they don't have things like this. It's because it works. Pakistan, like, can you not just see why it's not working? It's right in front of your faces. Like, that I think I'm going to leave it there.
Can you imagine how the fans of the Pakistan team feel if Daniel's feeling this way? I just feel sorry for Dizzy.
Test matches, Dizzy Gillespie has. Sorry, Menace. Dizzy Gillespie has the hardest job in world cricket right now.
Yeah,
coaching the men's Pakistan team. Like, at least with India, there's okay, you've got all the pressure of being the coach of the most followed international team in the world, but at least you've got the building blocks and you've got the team and you've got the resources for the most part. Like, Pakistan, it's not the safest place to be. It's just a mess from an administrative standpoint, but you have all the expectations of being a genuinely world-class team like India, but your team's just not as good. So yeah, good luck if you're Dizzy.
Yeah.
He's been driven to yell, hasn't he, behind the scenes? There was footage of him. If it's getting deep and Dizzy Gillespie, you can get to anyone that job, I reckon.
Yeah,
I'm not too upset about the Barber decision. Like, if you keep losing and he's not scoring any runs, give him a spell. Go and play some domestic.
They could have handled it better, though. Like,
yeah,
there's 3 days in between test matches. Pakistan have just leached 823 in the field. Like, I don't know. What
Yeah, we'll
what
find
could he
out.
have done in that situation?
No, but I think he's had a run of 10 tests where he's hardly scored any runs, so probably just fed up. Damien, you can't let it go?
Yeah, so in the last few hours prior to this podcast being recorded, the Ashes series fixture for the men's between Australia and England for the 2025-26 summer was announced, and looks like Perth Stadium, or Optus Stadium as it's known, is going to actually open the Test series, the Ashes series, for the first time, November the 21st to the 25th next year. They've got the day-night test at the Gabba. The Adelaide Oval will be that feeder just before Christmas, and then you got the traditional tests at the MCG and the SCG, Boxing Day and New Year's. I think it's just reward. I think for Perth, they missed out to a degree during COVID because they were separated. They pretty much separated themselves from the rest of the country during COVID. So sport-hungry crowds. They've got a good stadium there, one of the newer complexes anywhere around the country. I think it's just reward for them to open the summer. Hopefully the crowds come as well. It can be a little bit difficult when it's bloody hot, but at least there's more shading compared to that concrete jungle that was the Wacker back in the day, even though it was a more enclosed atmosphere. And good opportunity for the Queensland public as well to embrace the day-night tests because they're under a bit of pressure, I suppose.
Could be their last test match.
That's
forever.
what I mean. They're under pressure depending on what happens with the election and the stadium.
It could be the last test match ever in Queensland. You just think about that.
Well, I don't think it'll be ever. I think it'll be.
Damien, it's a better headline. Could be. It could be. There's no guarantees after that. So
yeah,
there isn't though. There isn't. All right. No, good. Can't let it go. So, if you're one of the few surviving Pommy listeners that hasn't unsubscribed because of all the abuse, then you can start to plan your trip down under next summer. All right. My can't let it go is I've been commentating on the Spring Challenge T20 tournament. And
have you gone?
I've gone well. I'll play some audio at the end of this of me commentating on Laura Harris smashing 102 not out of 46 deliveries in pretty much the opening game at North Sydney Oval. And there've actually been 3 or 4 centuries in the tournament so far. So my can't let it go is I'm commentating on the semi-finals of this tournament on Saturday. So if you're at home and you want some cricket from 10 a.m., it's semi-final day in the Spring Challenge T20 tournament. The whole country's going to be, camped around their TV sets for this this conclusion to this tournament. But seriously, Saturday is going to be great cricket. I think Meg Lanning going to be playing in that and one of those games, the way the table's looking. So, the Spring Challenge T20 tournament this Saturday, both semi-finals, and I am going to reserve my comments till after that. Commentary on Saturday about the tournament so far, but I think my initial assessment was probably pretty correct. Anyway, that's it for Can't Let It Go and this week's Cricket Unfiltered. Daniel, where can the listeners keep up with you?
DG Beswick1 on Instagram and Twitter and wherever you are on social media. I'll probably be there because I can't get off my phone.
Yeah, no one cares about anything else. Damien, what's going on? Are you going to be on the radio this weekend?
I will be. I'm doing a bit of racing and I'll be on Sports Day on Friday to the regional Victorian stations.
Great. Well, if you're regional Victoria.
3HA Hamilton or 3CS Colac. So tune in from 6 p.m. Friday there. We'll talk about the MotoGP. We'll talk cricket. We'll talk horse racing. It's the first weekend after the trade period in the AFL. So I think Victorian fans, sports fans, probably ready for something else.
They're ready for cricket. Cricket's here. Yes. All right. Well, that's it for this episode of Cricket Unfiltered. You know where you can find me, listeners. I sort of haven't slept well in the last week. I got to say, I'm pretty tired tonight. And I think it's that England performance in the first test against Pakistan. Just a little bit scary. So, I just don't think this Australian team could ever score 800 that quickly. So that's
not with that attitude.
Well, I'm not in the team, but, I don't think with our batting lineup they could. But anyway, the Ashes are about 18 months away. Well, not even, 12, 13 months away now. And, very, very nervous. Listeners, I'll be back with Mad Manners early next week.